By 1968, the Beatles were no longer the tight-knit unit that had stormed the music world just a few years earlier. Creative tensions, personal rivalries, and business disputes were pulling the band apart from the inside. Yet, amidst the chaos, one song emerged that reminded the world and the band themselves of what they were capable of when they channeled their brilliance into the music. It was haunting, powerful, and deeply personal, and perhaps fittingly, it was the last Beatles track ever shaped by the guiding hand of their legendary producer, George Martin. That song was While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
While my guitar gently...
Written by George Harrison and featured on the sprawling 1968 double album The Beatles, better known as the White Album, it was a turning point for Harrison, a career-defining statement that elevated him from the quiet Beatle to a songwriter of extraordinary depth. But behind the song's melancholy beauty lies a story of conflict, collaboration, and farewell. The final creative chapter in one of the most important partnerships in rock history. By the time sessions for the White Album began in May 1968, the band's internal dynamics had shifted dramatically. The camaraderie that had fueled their rise was fading. John Lennon was deeply involved with Yoko Ono and increasingly detached from the group's collective identity. Paul McCartney was becoming more dominant in the studio, often dictating arrangements and re-recording other members' parts. And George Harrison, long overshadowed as a songwriter, was growing frustrated with how little attention his compositions received. The mood was tense, and George Martin could feel it. The man who had overseen every Beatles record since their debut sensed that something fundamental had changed. The sessions were fragmented, with band members working separately on different songs. Gone were the days when ideas flowed freely, and the atmosphere was playful. Instead, the studio had become a battleground for creative control. Yet, amidst the disarray, Harrison arrived with a song that would demand, and ultimately receive, the band's attention. Inspired by a passage from the Chinese text I Ching and its philosophy of synchronicity, he set out to write a piece that would capture the sadness and fragility he felt beneath the surface of fame and success. While My Guitar Gently Weeps began as a simple acoustic demo. Harrison recorded an early version at his home in Esher, delivering a raw, intimate performance that reflected his growing maturity as a songwriter. But he knew the song had the potential to be much more. For years, Harrison had struggled to have his material taken seriously within the Beatles. Lennon and McCartney dominated the band's output, and while they acknowledged Harrison's talent, they rarely gave his songs the same level of collaborative energy they reserved for their own. But this time was different. Harrison was determined to make the band listen, and to make the song undeniable. When he brought it to the White Album sessions, however, the initial response was lukewarm. Lennon and McCartney were distracted by their own projects and didn't offer much input. Harrison was disappointed, but he refused to give up. He decided that if the Beatles couldn't provide the spark the song needed, he would look elsewhere. For it was then that Harrison made a bold decision. He invited his close friend Eric Clapton to play lead guitar on the track. It was an unprecedented move. The Beatles had never featured an outside guitarist on one of their core recordings. At first, Clapton was reluctant, telling Harrison that the Beatles didn't need him. But Harrison insisted, believing that Clapton's presence would change the dynamic in the studio. And it did. The atmosphere shifted immediately when Clapton arrived at Abbey Road. Lennon and McCartney, suddenly aware that an outsider was watching, became more focused and cooperative. With Clapton playing the now iconic lead guitar solo, the song began to take shape. His blues-inflected phrasing brought a new emotional depth to the piece, complementing Harrison's lyrics and elevating the track into something transcendent. For George Martin, who was overseeing the session, it was a reminder of what the Beatles could achieve when they put ego aside and focused on the music. Though the sessions had been difficult, the results were undeniable. While My Guitar Gently Weeps was unlike anything the Beatles had recorded before. Vulnerable yet powerful, deeply personal yet universal. The making of the White Album had been a draining experience for Martin. The band's increasing independence meant he was often sidelined during recording. They would spend hours experimenting without him, only calling him in when they needed orchestration or technical expertise. For a man who had once been deeply involved in shaping every aspect of their sound, it was frustrating. But while My Guitar Gently Weeps was different, Harrison trusted Martin's instincts, and Martin, in turn, was determined to help Harrison achieve the sound he envisioned. He worked closely with George on the arrangement, suggesting subtle changes to the dynamics and helping to craft the song's dramatic arc. His orchestral training allowed him to balance the various layers, acoustic and electric guitars, organ, bass, and drums, into a cohesive whole. It would be the last time Martin played such a hands-on role in a Beatles recording. By the end of the White Album sessions, his relationship with the group had changed irreversibly. The young men he had mentored from humble beginnings had become powerful, often stubborn artists. They no longer needed or wanted the same kind of guidance. For Martin, While My Guitar Gently Weeps became a fitting farewell, a final collaboration that captured both the magic and the melancholy of their partnership. At its heart, While My Guitar Gently Weeps is a song about disillusionment. Harrison's lyrics reflect his sadness over the state of the world and perhaps over the state of his band. I look at the world and I notice it's turning. While my guitar gently weeps, he sings, his voice tinged with resignation.
Look at you all, see the love that
It's a song that laments missed opportunities, emotional disconnect, and the distance that can grow between people who were once close. Even within the context of the White Album, an eclectic mix of styles and moods, While My Guitar Gently Weeps stands apart. It's one of the album's most cohesive and emotionally direct tracks, a moment of clarity amid the chaos. When the White Album was released in November 1968, it was both a triumph and a sign of things to come. It was ambitious, daring, and full of unforgettable songs. But it was also fragmented, a reflection of a band that was beginning to splinter. For George Martin, it marked the end of an era. He would return for parts of Abbey Road, but his deep involvement with the Beatles' creative process effectively ended with While My Guitar Gently Weeps.